You're listening to The Invisible Addiction, a podcast series investigating problem gambling in the UK. In this episode, I speak with Matt Zarb-Cousin, leader of the Clean Up Gambling campaign, co-founder of the blocking software GamBan, and former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn. I wanted to hear his point of view on the gambling industry. What is his experience with gambling addiction? What are his views on the current landscape of the gambling industry? What changes would he like to see implemented to make gambling safer in the future? Matt is a fantastic human being helping thousands of people through the GamBan software, which blocks gambling websites and apps on all your devices. You can reach out to Matt on Twitter, @MattZarb, and I will leave links to his work with Clean Up Gambling and GamBan in the description box below. Finally, if you haven't already, do check out theinvisibleaddiction.com with links to podcasts, blogs, blog posts, and more importantly, support networks in the UK for people struggling with gambling problems. Without further ado, here is the conversation between Matt and I. Enjoy! Hi Matt, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Hi Alex, great to be on the podcast. Thanks for the invite. I'm doing great. It's pretty warm in Southend, which is where I am at the moment, and obviously we're all struggling together through lockdown, but hopefully we will emerge from the other side completely refreshed and ready to take on the world again. But I have been trying my best to get this new campaign up and running. That's Clean Up Gambling, and what we're trying to do is get the government to commence a comprehensive review of the Gambling Act as soon as possible. And they did promise a review in their manifesto, the Conservatives, and in the Queen's Speech, which is the programme for government. But we're trying to make that as comprehensive as possible. So it includes things like limits to stakes online. Currently it's unlimited. Limits to deposits online, informed by affordability checks. We want to see a complete review of advertising, promotion and sponsorship. We don't think children should be exposed to gambling advertising at all. Obviously, research funded by an independent mandatory levy and commissioned by an independent entity, and treatment taken into the NHS. And also, I think everyone can see from what's happened in the last few years that regulation is really not fit for purpose. The Gambling Commission was formed as a result of the 2005 Gambling Act. The 2005 Gambling Act, the work that went into developing the ideas and the foundations for that legislation was in 2001. And in 2001, when you had a phone, it was a Nokia 3210. It wasn't a smartphone. I couldn't even have envisaged that the idea of video calling was sci-fi, so we're in an era now where everyone's got a smartphone. Smartphone pretty affordable if you basic models of smartphones, and most gambling is done on a mobile, and therefore you need legislation, you need laws that reflect that can properly regulate that, and a regulator that isn't just responsible for licensing, but also and also an entity as well as a regulator that's responsible for handling customer complaints and consumer redress. There's no ombudsman for gambling. There's an ombudsman for pretty much every other sector. There's no ombudsman for gambling. And it's a ridiculous situation where the Gambling Commission is at the moment, the regulator is in charge of commissioning treatment, or, is in trying to coordinate that, which is ridiculous. So yes, let's have a review as quickly as possible. And I think obviously it's, what we're trying to do at the moment is make the case for that review to be as broad as possible. And then I think we'll hopefully, once the terms of reference are defined, we'll start to argue for the sorts of policies that we want.
Fantastic. I mean, if it's okay, Matt, we'll come on to that. We'll bookmark this and perhaps come on to this a little bit later. So just for the listeners' benefit, really, I don't know if you could just maybe spend like a minute or two just talking about like your background and experience. Maybe we could sort of do a bit of a kind of chronological order of events, if you like, and we'll come on to Clean Up Gambling. So yeah, if you, I don't know if you want to spend a minute or two just talking about how you got into campaigning for social change, etc.
Yeah, sure. So I was addicted to gambling at 16, and that was to fixed odds betting terminals, which are machines in betting shops. And over a period of 4 years, lost about £20,000, got into a lot of debt. By the time I was 20, I was in massive amounts of debt, and got to the point, got very, very, very severely addicted. Got to the point where I wanted to take my own life. Was able to get treatment, thankfully. Didn't go back to gambling after about 6 months of treatment, and finished my degree, and then from there got really involved in politics. So after I got addicted to gambling, it was in recovery, because this is the thing I think people forget, like, it's not when you addicted to gambling. Sorry. This is the thing people forget. When you're addicted to gambling, it's not just about stopping gambling, it's about recovering from the addiction. And recovery is a very, very intense psychological experience. I think I found recovery. When I was gambling, I could pretend to be normal. I could just gamble and then put on a pretense that everything was fine, and I could do that quite well. When I was in recovery, very, very difficult to do that. I found it more difficult to cope with not gambling. Obviously, the gambling was doing a huge amount of harm to me financially, and it was making me depressed in the long run and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But like, actually not gambling, gambling cessation and the process of that was very, very difficult. Yeah. So you find other things to kind of do to fill the time and to concentrate your energies, and politics was the thing I found. So I got really involved in that. I ended up working for a couple of MPs after university, writing.
You studied at Birmingham, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So I was at Birmingham University, and I was gambling at university as well. So I mean, so after that, then from working for a couple of Labour MPs, I started to campaign with an entity called GRASP, Gambling Reform and Society Perception, and that was a new charity that had been founded. And what we wanted to do was try to give councils the power to block betting shop applications, because we were seeing that there were so many betting shops opening up, so they could circumvent the limit of 4 fixed odds betting terminals per shop. I did that with them, and then from there I did Panorama. So with Panorama on what was called Britain's High Street Gamble, which was about fixed odds betting terminals. It was a Michael Crick documentary, and I appeared on that. And from that, Derek Webb contacted me, and he's a philanthropist in the States. He's from Derby originally, and he was wanting to get his campaign going against fixed odds betting terminals. So that's how I started to campaign. And from there, I went to work for Jeremy Corbyn for a year as his spokesperson, and then came back. And then when we came back, we got the policy change that we wanted. So that's kind of a very quick, it seems to have gone on for ages, but that's a very quick answer to the question of how I got into all this madness.
I was going to say there's so many entry points to try and ask you and dive in and ask you about. It's crazy. It's crazy how like you can go from having like a gambling addiction to then to sort of get into. Do you think you got into politics because of the addiction?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
100%. If I had not got addicted, I would have probably got into my first choice university, I would have done a completely different thing at university. I would have been in a different place. Yeah. I would have had a completely different experience and different career trajectory. You know, I don't know what the alternative history would have been, but I definitely, it was the process of recovery that got me into politics. It wasn't a rational thing. It wasn't like, oh, I've lost loads of money, now I'm anti-capitalist. It wasn't like that. Like it was like just like a real intense, like I felt like extremely motivated to do something and to channel my energy somewhere. And it was almost like an over enthusiasm. Very, very, I don't think enough has been really researched about recovery. I find recovery to be a very interesting thing, what it does to people. I think it's more interesting actually than how people get addicted. I think how people get addicted is pretty straightforward. It's just variable rate reinforcement. Like, you know, it's Pavlov's dog. Yeah, you give someone a treat every so often. You don't give it to them every time, and then they keep going back and trying to get, you know, the repetition, and then there's the game design and stake and all the adrenaline and all that stuff. That's pretty straightforward. What's really interesting to me is what is your brain doing as it's recovering from addiction? From gambling addiction? How is the chemical imbalance affecting your personality? How is it affecting the way you're living? How your approach to risk taking? There's lots of things. Just the way that you see yourself as well. You know, that all is just that for me is totally fascinating.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm sort of just nodding my head to everything you're saying, because, you know, for me, it's a really interesting point you make about recovery, because I think for me, you know, it was like lack of confidence, loss of self-worth. Like you spoke about the brain, and you know, for me, like roulette was my big fix. Certainly on, as you say, the fixed odd betting terminals. That was, me and my mates used to call it the shredder. Which is, you know, and it just got to the point that, like, you know, my lucky number, it got to the point where I was just becoming numb to it, even winning, and so I just wondered if I then carried on into my everyday life, like you say, just unemotional, just completely glossed over, like you say, just sort of unable to kind of connect with people. Like, I could talk to people, but I couldn't have this sort of human kind of connection. It's just very odd. Yeah. So, I can agree with everything you're saying, basically.
Yeah. No, it's so weird, and you're actually better able to pretend to be normal. That's what I don't get. So you still know what normal is, or what normal looks like. So you still know that, because people don't, as you say, you know, this podcast you call it the hidden addiction. Because you
invisible addiction.
Sorry, I'll do that. This podcast called The Invisible Addiction, because you can hide it, and that's the thing. Like, you're able to hide it because you know what normal is. Maybe because you remember how you were before, and you're trying to act like you were before. But like, you're absolutely right. It numbs you, and that's the real tragedy of it. Is that you only derive pleasure from that thing, really. You only get any kind of adrenaline rush from it. And then even then, as you say, eventually you get to the point where even that doesn't do it. And then you just you know, becomes a kind of automatic impulse. And I mean, that, but yes, as I say, like, I find there is definitely something in the motivation that comes from recovery. And lots of people will be listening to this, I'm sure, who might be having experiencing harm from gambling, feel like they have a gambling addiction. If you stop gambling, obviously you need treatment. Obviously you need support. Definitely need support, and that's why it's important to be honest, I think, with people around you. But you will get a surge of motivation, and you will feel like you can do anything, and that's great. And that's kind of how I got to, like, I put it down to that completely, in answer to your original question. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I've spoken to another chap recently, Ed, who's he's in charge. Well, I say in charge. He's created Now We Win, a sort of social clothing brand, and we were having a conversation, and it's very similar. And he spoke, because he went to GA, Gamblers Anonymous, and he sort of was speaking about things and saying how, you know, it's put, the onus is put onto you to sort of to stop gambling. You've got to completely change your life. But he said, very similar to you, and I feel this as well, that there's a big motivation. There's actually something that kind of goes, Blumeneck, I've conquered this thing, this horrible big thing that lasted for years. Actually, I feel that I can take on the world, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and there's actually quite a lot of positives to come out of this, and again, speaking to another chap, Matt, I'm just name dropping now, but another person called Matt Gaskell, NHS clinical lead, and he was saying as well, in his experience, he sees a lot of potential actually, and there is, the new opportunities will present themselves. So I don't know. I'm being a bit nosy, I suppose, because as a Labour fan, I can't help but want to ask you a little bit. What was it like working alongside Jeremy Corbyn and as part of the Labour leader's office?
Oh, I was very, very intense. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I love the people I worked with, and I have a huge amount of respect for Jeremy and what he had to put up with. And, I think that if he had the entire party machine on his side, we would have won in 2017.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's the real tragedy of it. We probably wouldn't even be having this issue with the government at the moment, because we'd probably be in government if it wasn't for internal wrecking and sabotage, which I know happened. I was there. I know what they were like. There was a coordinated, consistent campaign against him from within. Look, everyone has their own political views. By the end, obviously, Jeremy wasn't popular with the public, but certainly in 2017, I think we could have won the election. I think we could have at least been in a position to form a government. And that's the real shame of it. But I learned a hell of a lot. I was doing crisis management every day. I was helping to formulate, what would probably be described as British left populism, and I felt that we positioned Jeremy very well as a left populist going into the 2017 election. And, we accepted the result of the referendum, and that wasn't an issue in the election. We were talking about investing in public services and domestic agenda and all that stuff. And I reflect on it, and I look back on it quite fondly as an experience. But it was also, I didn't have a day off. I didn't have hours off. Sometimes I slept.
Wow. I was gonna say, I'm so sorry for this comparison, but I've been watching The Thick of It recently, and I don't any comparisons can be made to that. But no, that
I mean, it's a bit like that. I would say that it's more mad. I would say that I would say that it's I found that I don't want to get too much into this kind of political discussion, obviously, because that's not the topic of what we're talking about. But I found that the internal hostility and resistance to Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party was something I completely underestimated. I found it it's almost pathological in the way that it was just completely visceral and nasty, and I just couldn't understand it.
But as I said, but why? But why?
It's just these. This is a culture that's developed that's anti-socialist, that sees the left as illegitimate, and which is complete nonsense, obviously. But it's part of the Labour Party has become captured by the establishment, by the British state, and if someone wants to lead the Labour Party, they have to ascribe to those kind of norms, those cultural norms. And Corbyn didn't ascribe to them. He wanted to change the system, change the economic system, so it benefited the majority of people. And this is something that obviously the Labour Party establishment couldn't fathom or facilitate. So that's where we are. And now we've got Keir Starmer as a leader. I wish him well. And as far as I'm aware, obviously his parliamentary private secretary is Carolyn Harris, who is a massive supporter of gambling reform and a very good friend of mine. So, Yeah, I mean, I was Rebecca Long Bailey's director of communications as well, like for her campaign. Carolyn used to exchange friendly messages during the course of the campaign. But yeah, it's good to be back on the same side as her because she seems to have a very, very good record of winning campaigns. So
that's great. No, that's good. It's good. I mean, I've done a little bit of research, Matt, and you spoke about. Again, I want to obviously move away from the politics if we can a little bit, and obviously talk about I don't want
to alienate everyone.
I was going to say, I've got a lot of mates that are Tories, and they're just going to be.
Sorry, guys, ignore that.
Yeah. No. I've done a little bit of research, and I've had a look on the Tribune website. Your article, "How to Campaign for Social Change and Win." And one of the terms that there's quite a lot of good in there to kind of that leaps out at me. One of the terms that sort of just springs to mind about you're talking about trying to change a discourse and stuff is the military term, the OODA, the observe, orient, decide and act, and it's obviously a little bit more about how to sort of frame it so you're not responding to them, the opposition. That you're not getting in this tit for tat, and actually you're setting up from a position of strength, so they kind of inadvertently, it seems kind of Machiavellian in a way, but I mean, obviously it works. I mean, could you tell us a little bit more about that, and obviously about the fixed odd betting terminals campaign, because that was 6 years of real hard work.
When you're up against a very well funded opposition. Or well-funded opponent, they will do everything they can to try to set the terms of discourse, to try to set the terms of the debate. And a great example of this, I think, is where they always say problem gambling affects less than 1% of the population. Now, obviously, there was a YouGov survey recently, and it was like, or maybe it was like actually 2.7% or whatever it was, 1.4 million people, but usually this is the thing they always say: it only affects less than 1% of the population. And then the next line is millions of people gamble responsibly and they enjoy gambling and all this kind of stuff. Now, what you don't want to do is argue on their terms. You don't want to say, well, actually, it's not 0.7%. It could be 0.9% or it could be 1.4%, because this misses the point, because these are all still comparatively small numbers. In aggregate terms, in actual whole numbers, they're big numbers. It's better if you're going to do it to talk about the actual numbers, because every one of them is actual life that's been ruined, and the people they know, their lives have been ruined or impacted by it. But getting into a debate about whole population statistics completely misses the point. What we wanted to argue was, of the people that use these machines, a huge proportion, talking about a third to 2/5, are gambling addicts, right? And that's a huge proportion. That's a massive. And in the context of less than 1%, if it is, of the population are gambling addicts, then it's even bigger. It's an even bigger problem. So what I'm saying is, don't acknowledge what your opponent is. Obviously, pay attention to what your opponent is saying. Don't acknowledge what they're saying in public, and don't let your lines or your campaign strategy be dictated by what they say. You have to make a case. You have to build a case when you are prosecuting if you're prosecuting in a court case, for example. You will build your own evidence base to make the argument that you want to make. And it is up to the person who is defending to respond to you. And therefore the industry should be responding to you. They should be responding to the protagonist. You have to be the protagonist. And you build your case on your own terms. You don't build it on their terms. You don't build, the prosecution doesn't go into a court case and think, okay, let's anticipate everything the defense is going to say and try to second guess that, or completely change their narrative because the defense said something. You win on the strength of your own evidence and the strength of your own argument. And this is more about positioning. But I think where it comes to OODA loops, and as you just described, it's not complicated. It basically, to sum it up, you want to get into a position, and you can get into this position where when your opponent is responding to you, they are making your argument for you. And we got to this point where in the final throes of the fixed odds betting terminal campaign, we were obviously arguing for a cut to £2 a spin. And by this point, we had absolutely obliterated the reputation of these machines and the betting industry and the bookmakers. And the bookmakers and people were fed up of them because they were proliferating on the high street. They were fed up with them because of money laundering and crime and all of the antisocial behaviour that was associated with the addiction. We'd made the argument that the product actually can induce or exacerbate addiction. People were fed up. They were like, £100 a spin, this is outrageous. Something needs to happen. How can it not happen? And then the ABB, the Association of British Bookmakers, now defunct, sadly, were running online advertising. A £2 stake will lead to the closure of betting shops, and it's like, and then people look at that and they go, well, a £2 stake seems a pretty reasonable amount. I mean, that seems all right. £2, same everywhere else, isn't it? £2 leads to the closure of betting shops. Well, there's a lot of betting shops on the high street, you know. So like, on their terms, it was like, this is a disaster. Lots of these shops will close. Lots of jobs will go. In reality, they overestimated massively the number of jobs that would go to try and make their own case and try and defend their own interests. But you know, and that's come to light recently. But like in their world, that was a really bad thing, and they were like, "We've got to communicate this. This is like," but that's because they were thinking about responding to us. They were thinking about that. They were thinking about responding to the impact of a £2 stake, rather than making the case, their own case, which is very difficult for them to do because it was pretty indefensible, to be honest. But that was a result of that. That's an example of how it can work anyway.
Yeah. I was going to say, you came out and famously sort of called fixed odds betting terminals, you know, the crack cocaine of gambling. And I mean, as a former addict, I completely agree with that statement. And obviously that soundbite was picked up because it definitely got put in people's minds. And I actually remember it well because I've only recently kind of given up gambling, by the way. So only about a year ago, well, if that, to be honest with you. But it was coming towards the end anyway. I don't, you know, people can listen to my story in a separate podcast. But me and my friends, we went in, and I think we went in on the day that these machines were reduced to £2, and we were gutted. We were absolutely gutted.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but
oh God.
Yeah, no. But obviously, you know, it was a good thing because, you know, from a user's perspective or consumer's perspective, I would go in and I went onto the roulette and I was like, this is rubbish. I can't win big. I can't do anything. And it did actually make me stop. Well, you know, stop going to the bookies. It dissuaded me. So, you know, kudos, tip of the cap, you know, it's, you know.
See, I mean, this is the thing, like, for the people that were, would you say you were already addicted by that point?
Yeah.
Or not? Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the people that were already addicted, that's what we were hoping would happen. I mean, we were hoping that it would just be like, this isn't roulette. And then, you know, that's that. But really, it would work as a preventative measure as well. So this is the thing. It's not just the people that are currently addicted, because generally, and this is pretty sad to say, but the nature of these machines was people would get addicted, lose everything they had access to, and they would self-exclude, and then they would never see that customer again. That's why they needed new customers all the time. That's why they put the shops in areas of high footfall. That's why they did aggressive promotions. That's why they, you know, free bets, tournaments. That's why they did it. They needed the new customers in all the time because they knew that their customer base was going broke. This is unsustainable, right? But this is what they were doing. So the people that are addicted are only a snapshot. in that particular time. Really what you want to do is prevent the future gamblers getting addicted. And that's what I hope the measure will do when it's done. And it looks like it's having that impact already, which is great. But it just shows that, the maximum stake, the content, the accessibility, all of these things are a factor. I'm sure that you've got similar stories, but I used to pop out for a magazine, this was in 2006 when magazines were still around.
A bit of Zero or Nuts magazine, was it?
Or whatever. Or just Tesco's or pint of milk or whatever. And then I found myself in the bookies because it was next door. And then I was in the bookies, and then I was gambling on roulette. So I just, think it's very important to recognise that is not normal. And what we think is normal because of what's happened after 2005 it doesn't mean it's normal, just because the idea that this is a really new thing, that roulette is so accessible and was until very recently accessible in betting shops, accessible on everyone's phone, accessible on the telly when you're watching telly and you see people gambling roulette. This is very, very new and is not normal. And there's a reason that we confined it to casinos, and we limited the number of casinos after the 1960s Gambling Act. And there's a reason that at one stage, Monte Carlo was the only place you could play roulette in Europe, because it was highly, highly addictive, and everyone recognised how addictive it was. So recognise it. So this is so going back to what you were saying before. Sorry to ramble on. Going back to what you were saying before about Gamblers Anonymous.
Yeah,
it's great that I think that people coming out of that, they don't feel oppressed by the addiction every day. They don't feel oppressed by it and feel like they have to deal with it every day, and they just instead find a new motivation. I think that's brilliant. I completely agree. But also, what I find problematic about Gamblers Anonymous, for all the people that it helps, is it does generally, and this doesn't go for all meetings or all people that are involved in Gamblers Anonymous, but I found generally it puts the onus on the individual for getting addicted, when actually there are a multitude of factors. Gambling policy, gambling legislation and policy, how accessible we make addictive products, stake, speed, accessibility, all of these things, all of these factors, advertising, inducements, promotions, all of these factors lead to more harm. So looking at it from the individual perspective, yes, you might have had a trauma when you were younger. You might have some kind of predisposition, some kind of mental illness that needs to be addressed, whether Gamblers Anonymous could do that or not. But if fixed loss betting terminals were never in betting shops, would you have got addicted to gambling? Who knows? There's legitimate questions. I don't think I would have ever got addicted to gambling if they weren't. So I think the product plays a massive part. Yeah,
I think it's very, very interesting. I mean, I feel like we could. I mean, I'm sure there's lots I kind of want to touch on. I've got my podcast notes here. I mean, but I suppose it's probably a good opportunity to talk a bit more about your new campaign. The Clean Up Gambling campaign, because you've mentioned, and it's so true, isn't it? You've mentioned about online gambling, and I mean, again, drawing on my own personal experience, a lot of it was like, right, okay, I can't go in the bookies now, so, and I'm not blaming you at all, Matt, but it was like I can't go in the bookies now, so what I'll do is I'll go online, and that was my own, I can't generalize, that was my own personal story or whatever, but obviously if you go online, like you've mentioned already, there's no limits, there's it's kind of unregulated or very loosely regulated, shall we say. So can you, I don't know what your opinion is about, can you tell us more about Clean Up Gambling and your new campaign? And I've got here, we want to talk about research, education and treatment, regulation, like you've mentioned, the stake, speed and deposit limits, the ads and and sponsorship. Obviously there's loads to talk about. But I don't know if you want to just kind of kick off and and just to sort of talk about Clean Up Gambling, really, and your new project.
Yeah, so I think what you've touched on there is quite important. So the fixed odds betting terminals, if you look at gambling products and you break it down by product, so online is not homogenous. You've got like slots, casino games, roulette, blackjack, three-card poker, whatever it is. You've got like poker, player versus player, bingo. There's loads of spread betting. There's loads of stuff online, right? So if you break it down by product and you include fixed odds betting terminals in that, fixed odds betting terminals were the biggest profit generator of all gambling products, including those online. So they were the biggest problem. And you're absolutely right that some people, such as yourself, who gambled on those machines, who were already addicted, that snapshot of people that we've already talked about, would have then gone online. However, the scope for more protections, I believe, is online. There is much greater scope to enforce rigorous self-exclusion, to enforce deposit limits informed by affordability checks, proper stake limits on products. There's just much better scope for player tracking. It's not like a betting shop. You can walk in with a wad of cash. No one knows who you are. You stick it in the machine, and then you walk out. No one knows how many shops you've been in that day. Self-exclusion is impossible to enforce, basically. Like it's I think, a much riskier environment. Also, the fact that you can do it in privacy, I think, I don't know. I think that, I don't think enough actually has been really researched about it, but I do think that the betting shop is a much more private place, in it, kind of paradoxically, because you're away from your family and you're away from any kind of domestic checks and balances that there might be. We don't know. I don't know, but that's kind of my perception. Was always people could go to the fixed odds betting terminal, and no one might ever find out about their addiction. Whereas if you're gambling online, you could have bank statements. There could be a trace. There could be like lots of, your partner might say, what are you doing on your phone? And like, it could be like, it could emerge that way. Anyway, we are where we are. So we think that the government has recognised that the Gambling Act is not fit for the modern day, and therefore all of these things, all of these problems could be resolved with this review, and we want to try and resolve as many of them as possible. And as you've already said, like stake limits are, I think, most important. And then there's other things like how research is funded. At the moment, the industry fund research through a voluntary levy that gets paid to GambleAware. So GambleAware are in charge. So the GambleAware will say, we're independent and all this kind of stuff. That's only a fairly recent thing, by the way. It used to be, the trustee board was full of industry executives, literally CEOs of Ladbrokes Coral and, all the big betting companies. But if they do something that the industry doesn't like, they'll just say, well, we'll fund something else then. The system is set up in that way now. So I think that the voluntary levy to be very generous to GambleAware, puts them in a difficult position, because they are trying to be independent, but they're also trying to keep the money coming in. Yes, exactly. So that needs to be a statutory levy, needs to be proper independent commissioning body. And then there needs to be, like, I think we need to look at Australian style ad ban, which is 8:30 in the morning till 5:30.
I think it's.
That's right. It's the other way around.
Yeah. I think that's a brilliant thing. I mean, they found that 6-year-old kids were like, brand awareness or brand loyalty, and like new betting odds and stuff like that. I mean, that's just like, what is going on?
I know, it's crazy, and there's now like pester power as well. So it's like,
what's that?
So you know how they call it pester power, where advertising aimed at kids. It's like an advertising industry kind of thing where they try to get kids. The objective is to get kids to nag their parents to get the thing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So now it's like there's evidence that like kids are like saying, "Can you put this bet on? Why haven't you put a bet on?"
Really?
Yeah. Which is like,
God.
Like, imagine if I haven't had kids yet, but if I was growing up and my kid said to me, "Dad, have you put a bet on?" I'll be like, "No, I haven't." I'll be so annoyed. Because you can imagine. Can you imagine that yourself? Like, you just be like, "How is this? This is crazy." Given our kind of experiences and everything. That would really annoy me.
No, I can imagine it would. I mean, it might slightly off topic, but on that point, I mean, it reminds me. I studied human geography at Leeds, and one of the things we did was retail geography, and there was this really interesting case study where they built a humongous Tesco's Extra in quite a deprived area of Leeds, Seacroft in Leeds, and they did this study, and they found that a lot of people's eating habits, or like, healthy, nutritious food or whatever. And they found that people on the estate, after the Tesco's was built, that you'd think that they would all sort of go over to Tesco's and whatnot, but they found that they were still shopping at their frozen foods, kind of little cash and carry or whatever. Sorry to generalise, but and they actually found one of the main reasons was about pester power. So that they found that the children would go in with, they go into the shops, and the parents were getting really annoyed because their budget was so small. The kids would be like, trying to put stuff in the trolley, trying to kind of pester them, and because their budget was so small, that embarrassment, that shame. So they actually didn't shop at Tesco's. Quite a convoluted.
No, but it's powerful. No, but it's a demonstration of why it's so powerful. And you've got so from our perspective, the industry. This is kind of what the Clean Up Gambling campaign is built on. Is this idea of self-regulation is impossible, and it's impossible because the industry, the vast majority of its profits are coming from people with gambling problems. This is a reality. This is a fact. And you talk about more than half of the profits, at least, are coming from people with gambling problems. So therefore, if you're introducing policies that you say, as an industry, are going to reduce harm, that is completely disingenuous unless you also post to the FTSE, to the stock exchange, a notice to shareholders that we're going to reduce our profits. And they're not going to do that, right? So this idea that they will accept reducing profits unilaterally is completely ridiculous. And they can't do that. I just think that structurally they are unable to do that. So therefore, you need the government to intervene, to have proper legislation, the regulator to intervene, to level the playing field, and to say, the entire industry is going to go through a process of transition because of these new regulations and these new laws. It's going to be built on what I would like to call the tombola model. Tombola has a maximum stake of £2. Okay. It has a huge customer base. Those customers stay with Tombola. It's a community. It's built to be sustainable and not this kind of, so like everything about the current industry model is get the customer, rinse the customer, get a new customer. And that explains everything. That explains all of their behaviors in affiliate marketing, advertising, the constant need for new customers, like the betting shops with fixed betting terminals, just constantly investing in marketing, getting new customers because their customers are going broke. It's unsustainable. So Tombola is maximum stake £2. their objective at board level was to reduce the spend per customer. Right? This is the model that they're built on. So it's possible to do it. They can do it. They can still have a business. They can still exist. We're not anti-gambling. What we're saying is that the idea that you can have these massive multi-billion pound businesses that are built on people losing more than they can afford, and more than half your profits come from people who are addicted. I'm sorry, it's not. That's just completely ridiculous.
It's morally wrong. It is morally wrong. I mean, it's just.
It's pointless even having a regulator and a regulated industry if that's the outcome. If the outcome is, you might as well say, at what point do you say the benefits of legalizing it are outweighed by the consequences of a lack of regulation? Like, if you're going to legalize something, you need to regulate it, you need to tax it. And we're not doing either of those things adequately, in my view. If you're going to legalize a harmful consumption sector, you need to protect people. That's the whole point. It's like the argument for legalizing drugs, which I have some sympathy with. If we were to legalize drugs, we would do so to regulate it properly, regulate consumption and regulate supply. We wouldn't legalize it and then not bother regulating it, which is kind of what we've got to with gambling. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's just nuts. So, I mean, obviously with the fixed or best in terminals campaign, that was very neat. It was very very to the point. It was, you can sum it up in one sentence. £100 to £2. This is what we're going to do. Fixed or bet. Very very targeted. Really zoomed in. Obviously, this feels like it's the complete opposite. Now it's like the whole umbrella, as it were. I mean, obviously it took 6 years to do the fixed or betting terminals to get through that campaign, which is, I can't imagine what the ups and downs would have been like. But I mean, this looks like it's going to be, it's like it feels like we're tackling a beast, a huge mountain at this point. I mean, do you anticipate this will take many years, or do you think this is going to be a quick thing? Because, like you mentioned, the Queen, in the Queen's speech, she said, "Look, this is something we're going to look at." How likely is this? How quickly will this get sort of sewn up? Or what are your thoughts, really?
Well, I think this is a different context now. I think it's a completely different. The understanding of gambling harm has shifted. The awareness of gambling harm has shifted considerably because of the Fixed or Bet Terminal campaign, because of the growing movement and understanding about the impact of gambling products and gambling regulation on gambling addiction and all that kind of stuff, and the consequent harms. I think that we're in a different place. And actually, the challenge of fixed odds betting terminals was twofold, really. Really, this is what took so long. It's educating the public on why it's a problem, why these machines, which were, well, these are just live fruit machines, aren't they? No. That is a whole process of educating. That's why the crack cocaine and gambling thing was very, very important. Not very, very few people played them or had an awareness of them. They weren't advertised on the TV. So they derived more profits than the National Lottery, but 1 point, something ridiculous 4% of the population used them in a year. So it was very, very difficult to convey to people that this was a problem that needed sorting out urgently. We got there in the end. And yes, I mean, look, I think you're right. We want to do a lot, and there is a very broad scope. But I think capturing the public's imagination and communicating to people that this is a very, very urgent issue that needs to be resolved, and all of these things need to be resolved, is going to be much easier than fixed odds betting terminals. And that's why I think it's right to be ambitious. If there's a review on the table, we want it to be as broad as possible, and we want it to resolve as many of these things as possible. So this issue doesn't have to be revisited again and again and again. But it's built to last. The foundations are there, and hopefully we get it right this time. But yes, I think already, I mean, it's completely unparalleled, the level of support that Clean Up Gambling's had already. If you compare it to not just the first 3 months of fairer gambling, the first 3 years almost. You know, the level of support, you see it on the social media pages, then, you know, the support on there on the Facebook page, and, you know, the stories that we're able to get out. So that's what we'll be doing. And obviously we've got a facility on our website where people can sign up and send a letter to their MP and do it in like a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Just seeing like dozens of those every day. So like the scale of this is going to be something quite different to fixed loss betting terminals, which was much a slow burner.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously you mentioned like obviously Carolyn Harris, like she seems like she's going to be a key player in this, perhaps. And I mean, yeah, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. No, she is, and so this is another legacy of the fixed loss betting terminal campaign. So these are foundations that we can build clean up gambling on, and the push for a review of the Gambling Act. So Carolyn led the all-party group on fixed odds betting terminals, and in that group you've got prominent politicians like Ian Duncan-Smith and Ronnie Cowan from the SNP. So it's cross-party. These are prominent politicians. There's about 50 MPs who have signed up to this group, and it's now the gambling-related harm APPG. So it's much broader. It's going to actually publish some recommendations soon. So the infrastructure that we've built up in the FOBT campaign is going to help considerably in making, you know, the allies that we built in that process, the arguments that resonated with parliamentarians. There's going to be a huge amount of progress just in the next couple of months. We're going to see the all-party groups recommendations probably in the next couple of weeks. We're going to see the Public Accounts Committee, which is an influential group that holds public bodies to account, like the Gambling Commission. They're going to issue a report on the state of the Gambling Commission, which, going by the evidence sessions, is going to be pretty scathing. So that will set a good context for the review. There's going to be a House of Lords report into the Gambling Act. There's going to be just a huge amount of things. A Social Market Foundation report coming in August about what the government needs to do. The Social Market Foundation is incredibly influential in pushing the government's agenda, influencing that. And then we're expecting the terms of reference for the gambling review to be in September. That's not confirmed yet, but this is sort of what we're guessing.
Yeah.
So huge amounts are going to happen within 6 months. So I think it's going to be. I think this could be a couple of years, maybe. Have the review, then you have the legislative process.
Yeah.
Looking at a couple of years, maybe. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I mean, it's sort of a little part of me can't think, you know, why has this not happened, you know, sooner? But obviously with all of your work with the FOBTs and you know, I feel like I'm singing your praises here, but you know, putting you on a pedestal. But it seems like you were pretty much at the forefront. You know, it seems like you've absolutely yourself, you know, been dogged in everything that you've done. I mean, you know, you've been at the forefront, and you. How does it feel that you've been responsible for some social change? Like you've actually made an impact that you can look back and tell your grandkids that this is what I did. You know, I mean that must feel amazing.
It's good. It's good to have won, to have got what we wanted, and we know that that's going to help millions of people that won't even know that they were been helped by it, because they would never have got addicted to the machines. You know, this is great. And look, I mean, I think there's so much more to be done. I always think like there's a lot we need to sort out, and obviously as I've already highlighted, there's a huge number of people now, other charities as well, like Gambling with Lives, who have been hugely influential and who will be going forward. And it's I mean, thank you, but it's not just me. and Tracy Crouch, who was the Minister for Gambling, who resigned to expedite the policy change. She's fantastic. And I think that's what happens is you start off on your own. It's just me and Derek Webb, who I would never have got into this had I not met Derek obviously. And then you end up with a huge movement, and that's the satisfaction I get. It's knowing that if you build, you're almost building resistance to any rolling back of the gains that you've made. So it's so important that it's not just you in the end, and that actually you mentioned this just now. It's like, how has this not happened already? That's the state you want to get to with everyone going, how's this not happened already? How's the £2 thing not happened already? Like in the beginning, it was not like that. It was like £2. You're mad, aren't you? This is ridiculous nanny state nonsense, right? And then in the end, it was £2, of course. and that's the thing. You want to create a new common sense. You want to create a new consensus, cross-party, in the public, and that's the position that we're arguing from now. Is that there is a huge, overwhelming level of support for the changes that we want the public supports limits 85%. The public supports ad ban 80%. The public supports bringing the operators back on shore 75%. The public supports deposit limits 84%. Now, this is just off the top of my head, but like they're all this is overwhelming levels of support. So it's a much easier job now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think I could sit here and probably chat to you all day and just have a natter about this, that, and the other. But is there? I'm sure I'm sure there'll be something I've missed off. Could you just tell us a little bit more? Maybe are you okay for time? Are you okay for one, maybe two more questions? Can you tell us a little bit more about loot boxes? Because this is a new term that I'd kind of only recently come across, and it's to do with FIFA. Am I correct? FIFA Ultimate Team, and is this again another way to sort of normalise gambling for kids and get them into betting? And I don't know. I'm just coming from a standpoint of not really knowing much about them, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So loot boxes are transactions that. So you mentioned an example. FIFA Ultimate Team is an example, but it's a transaction where you don't know what you're going to get, and you can spend money on a loot box, and you might get. Sorry, if people listening don't know about football, but this is you might get Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, or you might just get some championship player or whatever.
Titus Bramble,
Titus Bramble, there you go. Yeah, perfect. So yes, it's a gamble, and studies have shown that to get a good player, your chances are like less than 100 to 1. So kids are like spending £5 on a loot box each time.
And real money. This is real money, by the way.
Real money.
Not like online. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Now, another feature of our gambling laws is that gambling is defined as a wager for money or money's worth. Now, what they argue is because the player that you might win cannot be sold for money's worth. It cannot be sold for money. It is not money's worth. And because it's every year, obviously, when there's a new FIFA game, just the slate gets wiped clean and everyone has to start again. Therefore, it's not money's worth. So this is why the definition of gambling really should change to a wager for something of value, because the only reason someone is putting loads of money in is because the thing they want to get is valuable, right? And that could be subjective. Some things are valuable to some people, some things aren't. But like, it should be a broader definition of gambling to incorporate loot boxes, because these are gambling transactions, and most people. So the government has agreed that they're going to review loot boxes, and if they can't, well, I think what they're going to end up doing is having to change the definition of gambling in order to incorporate it into the regulatory framework. But the Gambling Commission, the regulators, like, this isn't our problem. We can't do anything about this because it's not gambling. So we're in this situation where kids as young as like 5 or 6 can make these kind of what are wagers on these games, which is crazy.
That's nuts. It's nuts. I mean, I've seen another stat from Gambling with Lives. 55,000 young people between 11 and 16 addicted to gambling, and it's just, I don't know. It seems like grooming, doesn't it? It feels like, as I say, the normalisation of gambling and things like that. So, yes, I feel like I've covered off everything I wanted to ask you, Matt. I mean, is there just finally, is there anything else you want to add? Anything that you think, hang on, I haven't mentioned that, or anything like that, such like?
Well, I think go to cleanupgambling.com and have a look at the site. Summarise the need for a new gambling act in a 1-minute video on there. Yeah,
it's a great video, by the way. Yeah,
everyone's got really short attention spans these days, haven't they?
I think they don't like watching it through. I've set up this YouTube channel. It's like this average view duration. It's like, come on, just yeah.
Anyway, so no excuses. It's 1 minute, and get on there and use the template to lobby your MP. Send a letter to your MP, and let's stay optimistic, because I think we can achieve a lot. And good luck with this, Alex.
No, thank you very much. It's no, cheers. It's as I say, it's been nothing but a pleasure to talk to you. To be honest with you.
Likewise. Likewise. Thanks for letting me talk and ramble on. You did a great job.
I've got a real tendency to talk, so it's actually quite nice to hear your someone else's voice rather than mine. But I feel like is it virtual cheers? I mean, is it too early to? It's nearly midday. I don't know. I feel like you clock off. Actually, no, this isn't very responsible. Is it talking about having a? Can we talk about going for a pint? Yeah, we could talk about that, can't we?
I suppose. Yeah, I have no issues with that.
But a virtual cheers, a raise of the glass, but cheers.
There we go. Yeah, all the best with it. And thanks again for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. I'll speak to you soon.
Nice one.
Cheers. It was a real pleasure talking to Matt and hearing from a leading campaigner. Thanks once again to him for talking so openly and sharing his knowledge and insight with us. As always, plenty of takeaways from the conversation. How Matt believes there should be more research about recovering from a gambling addiction, especially the surge of motivation that you'll feel. How there's starting to be more overwhelming public support for change, from more awareness and knowledge about gambling addiction. The urgency to change the 2005 Gambling Act with tighter regulations such as state limits and affordability checks, and also to prevent children from being normalised to gambling through advertising and sports sponsorships and being able to gamble on loot boxes such as those on FIFA. So, that's the final episode of the Invisible Addiction Series 2. It's been a fascinating insight into the landscape of the gambling industry. We've heard from former gamblers, people in the treatment sector, an industry insider, and a leading campaigner. I'd like to thank Darren at Rule It Out, George Cooper, Katie Reynolds-Jones at GamStop, Matt Gaskell at the NHS, Richard Flint, the former CEO of Skybet, and Matt Zarb-Cousin at Clean Up Gambling for giving up their time and sharing their knowledge and insight with us. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to you for listening. The Invisible Addiction podcast has started to grow, and I'm super thankful to have you on board. I'm delighted to announce that there will be a third series of podcasts. In the meantime, look out for a series of vlogs about problem gambling. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel for notifications of new uploads. And I'd also be super grateful if you could leave a rating and review on iTunes, which helps spread the message about the Invisible Addiction podcast and make sure that it reaches more people that need it. Thanks once again, and speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.